I want to thank you for joining me again for another podcast of the Apologist Bookshelf. I'm Gary Zacharias. I'd like to take another look. This will be the second podcast dealing with a new book by Dr. Jeff Myers, who's the head of Summit Ministries. And that's a great ministry, by the way. It's a book called Truth Changes Everything. Let me check it. It came out in 2022, so it's not brand new, but pretty new. Subtitle, How People of Faith Can Transform the World in Times of Crisis. So my question to you is, are we living in a time of crisis? Oh, definitely. So the first podcast I did dealt with 14 ways, he says, that we could practice speaking up to build trust, not just to get people irritated, but to build trust. So that was a great section. If you have a chance, it's some time ago. By the way, when I mentioned that I'm doing a second podcast or a third podcast, if you'd like information on how to find it, let me know. It was several weeks back, some time ago. So anyway, this time I wanted to do chapter 3, Does the Truth Matter? And that's a great question. This is one of the early chapters in the book. Does the truth matter? Well, for a lot of people, no, not really. He starts off, he said there was a short-running Netflix series, and it has a character, kind of a messianic character. I don't know if it's named Jesus, but here's what he says. You have to shed your burdens, the pain, the shame, leave it all behind, strip it all away. Only then you can speak your truth. Wait a minute there, Jeff Myers says. Speak your truth. He said that resonates with people who want to believe that my truth is mine. So it's all self-centeredness these days, and it's all the individual self, the autonomous self that is what people are going to go to. And it says, what matters isn't whether my story is true or false or whether my actions are right or wrong. What matters is I speak my truth. He said most people, even Jesus followers, believe that. Kind of a no judgment allowed mindset. He says that's growing even among Christians. How do we know that? Well, his organization, Summit Ministries, which works with the next generation coming up to give them a biblical worldview. And by the way, we're always just one generation from losing that, aren't we? So thank goodness for Summit Ministries, great organization. So he said there was a study that was conducted by Summit and the Barna Group, and they're very well respected for research. So they found that self-identified Christian churchgoers, okay, so these are people that say, yeah, I'm a Christian, under age 45, so keep that in mind, under age 45, they're 4 times as likely as older generations to agree with this statement. If your belief offends someone or hurts their feelings, it's wrong. Wow, wait a minute. If your belief offends someone or hurts their feelings, it's wrong? That's how you determine right and wrong? By how it affects other people? Oh, it hurts my feelings. Oh, okay, well, then what I said must be wrong. Only 6% of young adults agreed that moral truth is absolute. Wow, isn't that amazing? Kind of depressing. He says the idea of reality is under attack these days. He gives a quote here from the New York Times. It has insisted that the government set up somebody called a reality czar to decide for all of us what's real. Now, that is more than chilling. I mean, that sounds like 1984, doesn't it? We will determine reality and we'll shape it. And so Jeff Myers says he's worked with Summit for some time and he's engaged in hundreds of conversations about truth. He said most people really haven't thought very deeply. He said many people just take it for granted that truth with a capital T exists because that's what they've learned growing up. But he said others will reject T, capital T, truth, because they know some mean people who believe in it. So he said truth is something worth having well-formed convictions about. He says much is at stake. He quotes from well-known historians Will and Ariel Durant. They wrote, quote, a great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself within. Oh, man. And Myers says, of course, that what we believe and how we act on it, that's more important for holding a civilization together than what we buy or who we vote for. Yeah, I would agree with that. If we lose these basic fundamental beliefs that are holding us all together, what's left to maintain? How do we get order out of that? And he quotes from a Harvard sociologist, Sorokin. Here's what he said. When a society dispenses with God, with the absolute and rejects all the binding moral imperatives. The only binding power that remains is sheer physical force itself. And I always think of John Adams. Now, this isn't anybody that Myers is talking about, but I think about John Adams. He said, our Constitution was basically built for a moral people, and it'll fail with anybody else because you need morality so people will hold their lawlessness in check. But if you get rid of morality and do whatever you want to do, look out. You're going to need nothing. You're going to need just physical strength to hold these people together. You're going to have a lot of surveillance. It's going to be a police state. That's what we're seeing in China, and it's coming our way as well. He said, how about what physical force can do? He said, case study number 1, the Soviet Union. Tens of millions of their own citizens were murdered by their own government. Solzhenitsyn, that wonderful Russian novelist, he was in prison in a gulag. He said, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Yeah, and then Myers says, yeah, truth matters. It's hard to think of anything else that matters more. So he comes up with a nice analogy. He's got a section here that says why we can't see the truth. He said, truth is hard to find. Really? Yeah, he says, not because it's hiding, but because we're looking in the wrong place. We're looking within. It's like, I think this is good, it's like trying to find your way, but you got a compass that only points to you. Isn't that a wonderful picture? That's such a great analogy. Trying to find your way, but the compass points to you. The needle is always pointing to you. I thought that was really true. He mentions the Apostle James, the half-brother of Jesus. He was so concerned about people's confusion over truth, he coined a term. I didn't know that. That's James 1:8. Here's the Greek word, dipsukos, which means wavering between two minds. So he says the double-minded are unstable. And he said that's our problem here. So we've got to search for this truth. He said we need to wake up. He said Jesus' followers, the ones in the past who changed history, went out and lived life to the fullest, knowing there was truth out there. They chased the conviction that Jesus was the truth. And they lived out that conviction. What did that do? It unleashed centuries of creativity and passion. He said, it could happen again. It could happen again. All you need is a courageous, creative few people to make things happen. You don't have to have every single person in the world agree with you. In fact, he quotes Bill Brown from the Colson Center, who said this, one person sincerely committed to a cause is more valuable to that cause than 1,000 who are merely interested. I thought that was really a good point. So he says, let's take a look at some of these ideas of truth now. Understand the truth's viewpoint. He says, truth with a small t says truth can't be known. What did Oprah Winfrey say? Speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have. That was at her Golden Globes, the speech there. Really? So the way she phrased it, notice that? Speaking your truth. So he says, there's a world of difference between speaking your truth by telling your story or telling the truth and illustrating it with your story. So that's that truth's viewpoint. We have to give up the search for capital T truth. That's always true for everyone, everywhere, all the time. All we can know, people say, is how each of us sees things. But that doesn't help, does it? How does that help us when we're facing genuine disagreement? So, for example, he has some wonderful stories in this book, by the way. He says a friend and Jeff Myers once witnessed a crime. So afterwards, the police detective showed him a lineup. I pointed to one of them, pretty sure he was the culprit. After the detective left, my friend gave me an incredulous look. Why did you point to that guy? He was the wrong one. I was stunned, Myers says. I thought I'd picked the right one. My friend thought I'd picked wrongly. Maybe somebody went free who was guilty. What was I to say? Well, my truth is that was the guy. Of course not. That'd be absurd. He says there's no escaping capital T truth versus small t truth, conflict. He says it affects our belief in God, our beliefs in gender and race and politics and just about everything else. He said, we get these battles over truth. They flare up all the time. All of a sudden, there's all sorts of snarky comments on social media or whatever. He said, conflicting stories can't be true and untrue at the same time and in the same manner. He said, for example, You can't have unrestricted access to abortion and restricted abortion. You can't have a 30% tax rate and a 75% tax rate on the same people at the same time. You can't have fracking and no fracking at the same time in the same place. PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, is not the same as PETA, People Eating Tasty Animals. I thought that was pretty funny. But he says, we've got to get ready. This battle is out there. He says, philosophers have tried to look at this idea of truth throughout history. And we go back, he says, let's start ancient Greece. So here's number one. Here's the first of 4 ways that philosophers have struggled with this idea of truth. It was sophism. And so in ancient Greek, truth was whatever helped you win. There's a man named Gorgias. He made a living by teaching people how to make their case in court. He didn't really care what they said, whether it was moral or immoral, just taught them how to win. And it says, we know his core arguments were this: nothing exists. Even if something exists, nothing can be known about it. Even if something can be known about it, knowledge about it can't be communicated to others. And even if it could be communicated, it couldn't be understood. So he says that's pointless. So to Gorgias, the search for truth with a capital T was pointless. Just try to win. And historians have called him and other teachers sophists. And Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. But it's negative now, isn't it? We get the word sophistry, means tricky manipulation. Nietzsche in the 19th century tried to rehabilitate this. He thought that was a superior view. Well, so we've got that one. Now, what about a second view of truth? He calls it deflationism. Truth is just window dressing. He said there are philosophers today that just shrug off the search for truth. They use the deflationary view of truth. It says discussions about truth are just meaningless. But this view has come under severe criticism. Christian philosophers oppose it, but so do atheists. They point out there's a difference between saying it's true that the sun rose today and saying the sun rose today. They said, yeah, there's a huge difference between those two statements. How about number 3? Here's another view that philosophers have come up with: pluralism. And we're living with that today, aren't we? The idea of saying some things can be objectively known while others can't. So things like, that painting is beautiful, or Ronald Reagan was a great president. Just truth is in the eye of the beholder. So what we call truth, with a small t, is just related to our personal or cultural situation. We each have preferences. We're shaped by our experiences. But here's the catch. If you take that to extreme, Meyer says, pluralism implies that we can't make meaningful distinctions between truth and falsehood, or even between good and evil. Can we really say all paintings are equally beautiful? Is it really the case that nobody could know the difference between a bad president and a good one? What about moral issues? Is there no difference at all between saying it's good to care for abandoned puppies or it's good to torture abandoned puppies? So he said in an extreme form, it makes moral decision-making impossible. Well, here's a fourth view. I'm sorry, that was the third view. Here's the fourth view: pragmatism. Truth is whatever works. So in the last 100 years or so, he said you've got people like William James and John Dewey and Richard Rorty have said we can't know truth with a capital T. All we can know is what works. So one flaw in pragmatism is it opens the door to propaganda. What's to stop crafty people with a lot of money or influence from manipulating public perceptions to advance their viewpoint and squelch others? So if you deny ultimate truth, you can turn the world over to skilled arguers rather than truth seekers. So he says these 4 views fail. He said they're not without merit, but he said we should be able to come to agreement on a lot of things about, but not having to fight over whether truth exists. He says, for example, in the United States, we drive on the right side of the road. That wasn't a moral decision. Other nations do it differently, but we all here agree on it. It's a rule. It's a norm. It's not a reflection of some eternal truth. But when it comes to moral decisions, every society has to make these. These 4 views fall short. Take things like sex trafficking or subjugation of women or confiscation of private property. So if they're just societal norms, does that mean other societies might have a different way to handle sex trafficking or subjugating women or confiscating private property, and that we're supposed to be okay with that? He said, actually, some people do believe that. He said, I once conversed with a professor. So this is Meyer's story. And here's what the professor said. Our society has no right to judge other societies. Now, he points out, always watch for self-refuting statements. He said, her statement was clearly a judgment, right? Our society has no right to judge other societies. What's she doing? She's judging our society. Oh, that's hilarious. There are so many self-refuting statements like that. But anyway, her statement was a judgment. I let it go by. So Myers instead said, well, what about the practice of tea? That's an Indian tradition that at the end of a man's funeral, they'd have his body there on the funeral pyre, burning him, and then they'd throw the widow alive into the flames. That's sati. So he asked this woman who says we shouldn't judge other societies, is that okay? She said, well, I can't say that without first understanding their culture. So Meyer said, well, would it be okay if it was your daughter being thrown onto the flames? And she said, no. But why not? Instead, the professor turned and walked away, leaving the question hanging in the air between us. That's sad, isn't it? Yeah. He said, even atheists say those kinds of things. That's a violation of human rights. That's not okay anywhere, anytime. But when you ask them, why not? Why is it wrong? He said atheists will take things like, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But Meyer says, how do we know those statements represent reality? Those are just opinions, aren't they? And they're people who are in power positions, and so they're strong enough to get their way. How do we know that one? All right, so then kind of sad here at the end of the chapter, he quotes a detective character in Umberto Eco's book, The Name of the Rose. There was no plot, and I discovered it by mistake. That's really sad. He said, is there any plausible viewpoint for today's world? Can truth really be known, and how would we know it? And that's where he's going to stop this chapter. So I hope this is useful to you. We've really got to wrestle with the idea of truth in our culture today and get people to realize there are certain things that are true for everybody, everywhere, at all time. I always think the simplest one, is it okay to torture babies for fun? Think about that. Is it okay to torture babies for fun? Now, who in the world is going to say yes? And the minute they say no, then we've already discovered a universal moral item. And if that's out there, then there is a world of universal truths with a capital T. Anyway, I hope you liked this podcast. The book, again, Truth Changes Everything. A really good book. Dr. Jeff Myers is the author. And thank you for being part of this podcast, and we'll come up with another one really soon.